Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We have a big show in store for you today, a big weekend to look ahead to with Tyler Calvaruso, our recruiting insider here at Lions 24/7. You'll hear from him in just a bit. We're going to break down another official visit weekend that's set to occur in Happy Valley. A lot of the commits will be on campus, but there's some dynamics in play there in terms of commits that have been looking elsewhere, visiting other campuses, a chance for Penn State to maybe solidify itself, and a few notable uncommitted recruits coming to campus. We'll break that down all with Tyler Calvaruso in just a little while, along with a preview of Friday's latest prospect showcase coming to Happy Valley. We've got another 7-on-7 tournament. We're hearing that about 3 times as many teams as we covered last Friday. So it's going to be a long day on the intramural fields over at Penn State's practice fields. We'll have the big man challenge going on as well. So plenty coming your way on the recruiting front, but we begin with a trip to Haluba Hall on Thursday. We had a chance to hear from James Franklin in a media beat setting for the first time since Penn State wrapped up spring practices with the blue-white game back on April 13th. So today is June 13th. Naturally, there's a lot to catch up on with the head coach. We also heard from several assistant coaches, coordinators, general manager Andy Frank, strength coach Chuck Losey. It was quite the day over there, and it all led up to Lift for Life, which we have coverage of at Lions 24/7, a fantastic cause. We'll talk about that a little bit toward the end of this segment, but bringing in Daniel Gallo now, who is there alongside myself and Mark Brennan and Grace Brennan for coverage at Lions247.com on Thursday. And Daniel, we are, I don't know, you kind of say halfway in between preseason camp and spring practice. We're kind of in that area where you're getting the remaining pieces of your roster to campus. Chuck Losey, the strength coach, talked about the value of these next 6 weeks now that you have the roster intact in finding leadership, because you're going to need to hang your hat on whatever you buckle up with in 6 weeks, because that's what you're riding with all the way into January. So a meaningful stretch ahead for this team. And today gave us a chance to, I guess, pick the brains as much as we can in this kind of setting of different storylines that are in place for Penn State football, program development, player development. And Daniel, before we get into it, I want to note there is a lot for us to work our way through. We're just coming out of team facilities now. We're recording this on Thursday. So stay tuned at Lions247.com for a bunch of coverage. We're going to get into a few of the conversations now, but some of them we just haven't listened back on the audio quite yet. We asked a lot of questions. We got to hear some of those answers. And so we'll circle back on our next episode of the podcast, give you a little bit more. We heard from some players today as well. But concentrate on Franklin, Daniel. Now that I kind of set the stage there with this intro, Drew Shelton, I thought was probably the most timely, newsy item to come out of that conversation. It was the first name I brought up to James Franklin during his media availability today. He said that just this morning they were discussing Shelton. He is fully cleared now. He missed all of spring ball. Remember, he is by far the most experienced offensive tackle on this roster. Started 5 games as a freshman in 2022 with Olu Fashanu sideline. Played more than 400 snaps last year as the next man up on both right and left sides, and started the Peach Bowl with Olu Fashanu going off to the NFL draft. So this is a big step forward for the offensive line, and Drew Shelton is now going to have to overcome those missed spring practice snaps.
Yeah, I thought that it was a good place to start with talking to Franklin earlier today. I think that Drew Shelton is someone that, was kind of out of sight, out of mind a little bit. When you have Olu Fashanu on one side and Caden Wallace, breaking out on the other, and both of them staying healthy, he was, limited a little bit into when we saw him in the different situations, and then not seeing him in the spring at all as he worked back from that injury. I think to kind of get that update now, especially going into a pivotal offseason, pivotal summer for that offensive line when you talk about replacing both of its starting tackles. So, I thought that the feedback from Franklin on Shelton I thought was pretty interesting. I thought that he kind of framed it as Shelton is a really, really key piece to this offensive line and a really important guy next season. And I think that's really accurate. And then I think the jumping off point for something else interesting from Franklin was about how Javen Williams has put himself in a position to get, I think Franklin termed it as legitimate reps this fall. And so I think going into the competition at left tackle with that kind of, established out there, I think that sets us up for what should be a pretty interesting competition that I think we're going to have a lot of eyeballs on, and there's going to be a lot of curiosity about as we move forward.
Drew Shelton is just a couple years removed from being the shiny new object in the offensive line room, a guy who steps up as a true freshman. He was a June enrollee, and you come out of 2022. Did he play perfectly at left tackle? No, but they didn't lose a game with him at left tackle. The offense found its rhythm. They went out and they won the Rose Bowl, and he's able to kind of take another step back. You wonder what last offseason may have meant for him. All the time he spent at right tackle, trying to push Caden Wallace for that job with Olu Fashion, who is the unquestioned left tackle, back for another year in Penn State. Ultimately, he did land back at left tackle. That was his focus toward the end. But it's tricky, Daniel, because he looked like an ascending figure coming out of his freshman year. Last year, I think when you kind of gauge fans and us on the beat evaluating his play, didn't necessarily wow you. And then you learn, okay, well, he was dealing with an injury, and James Franklin said it was one of those that you can play through, but eventually he got it taken care of. He missed the spring as a result. So it's a little difficult to kind of know how much Drew Shelton, how much is that Drew Shelton in the Peach Bowl going up against Ole Miss? Whatever he's dealing with. We saw him in an arm sling at a public event back in the winter. So regardless, it's a fresh start for him, and it quite literally could be a fresh start if he goes out and wins this job. But I found it, like you said, interesting that Franklin was quick to insert Javen Williams into the conversation, a former 5-star recruit, a guy who kept his red shirt intact last year. And Phil Trautwein said that Javen Williams was one of his rep monsters of the spring practices because he got a bunch of work at left tackle with Shelton unavailable. He was pretty much the guy, the primary left tackle for the main offense during the blue-white game out in Beaver Stadium. I think Phil said, 600-plus snaps, something like that for Javen Williams over the course of spring ball. So he's put himself in a good position. And as we've said in the past, he hasn't hesitated, has Phil Trautwein, to utilize a couple guys by design. We've seen it in the past. And if they can't sort this thing out through August and they think both guys give them a chance to win, then I wouldn't be surprised to see either involved, during the first half against West Virginia. We talked about that possibility. What did you make of James Franklin's comments about the whiteout? Because he was pretty candid. I think a lot of people will appreciate this. He was asked directly, what do you want for the whiteout? And it has not been announced yet. We're getting pretty late into the calendar for this not to be announced. And then James Franklin was also asked, what are you looking for from this matchup? And we know it's one of the annual, must-see TV moments for college football. And we're blessed to be able to be in that press box and experience it from that angle. But James Franklin brought a lot of variables into play. And I think the average fan is starting to understand how TV money is involved with this stuff. You can't just say, I want to play Ohio State at 7:30 and we're going to have a whiteout. He said there's a lot of compromising happening. He talked to athletic director Pat Kraft about this subject earlier on Thursday. And not going down without a fight, but also sounds like someone who's also being a realist about the time of day factor in the whole conversation.
Yeah, I thought that James Franklin was pretty, I think, even keeled in talking about that with us today. He talked about he said, yeah, I'm like everyone else. Like, I want everything. He said, I want it all in terms of, the opponent, time of day, probably, where it is on the schedule too. But he said that the reality is that that's not really how it works, is that, there's all these different factors. And I think the emergence of, kind of how things have settled in with who the Big Ten's TV partners are at this point, and the way that the way that Saturdays are just kind of divvied up now in terms of who has their real estate where, has kind of, at this point, you can almost kind of set things up, at this point in the year. You can kind of guess a little bit more. So, I think that a lot of this got kicked off by, there's a report from Brett McMurphy that said that, NBC had its preferred primetime lineup, and the only game on there that was a Penn State home game was the Illinois game on September 28th. The only game for Penn State, the only two games for Penn State that have legit, locked in times and TV designations are West Virginia in the season opener and Bowling Green the next week. Both of those are going to be nooners. But so I think you can kind of read between the lines and, make some connections. And, it's you can kind of, I think Franklin said you kind of can see where things are trending. And so, I think that this is something that's interesting. And, I think that, it is a little bit curious to me in terms of how the networks appear to be valuing the whiteout. Because, I like to think I'm pretty impartial given my background and everything and, my relationship with college football. But, going to a whiteout, it's like, yeah, I mean, everyone should be watching this. This should be the biggest game.
I mean, Daniel, before you covered the team, I think it was 3 consecutive years where ESPN's game day set was on Old Main Lawn. It was for building up to a whiteout matchup in under the lights at night in Beaver Stadium. And you have Kirk Herbstreit telling the world this is the best environment in college football. So you'd understand why James Franklin wouldn't want to maybe move forward and see them playing in a noon kickoff. In that kind of a setting, even if it is Ohio State, and does it still resonate the same way as it does in that night setting when you've got the anticipation building up all day and you have that kind of prime time atmosphere that's just tough to duplicate? And then the other question is, do you view Illinois as an opponent worthy of this? Now, I will remind folks, not that they need it, that last time Illinois came here, they left with a win, but this is perennially not a program that is going to be punching at the same weight as Penn State. So people want Michigan, people want Ohio State, people want one of these sexy new Pac-12 teams that have joined the party to be this matchup. But I don't know, it's starting to run out of room in the musical chairs game to get a desirable outcome, I think, that's going to really appease the entire fan base.
Yeah, and we should know soon. I went and looked it up today. I think it was last year we found out in mid-May, that it was going to be Iowa. 2 years ago, we found out, I believe, June 1st, that it was going to be Minnesota. And in 2021, the Auburn announcement was mid-July. But you take that with a grain of salt because that was coming out of COVID. We didn't really know how a lot of different things were going to look. At that point, things were kind of operating on a different schedule. So, I'm kind of surprised that we don't know yet. And Franklin kind of made the point today also from just like a pure logistics standpoint of planning their season. He said that they need to know when this is going to be so then you can plan all of the other themes that Penn State has. I mean, you've got those branch campus days where, they bring everybody in. You've got different tributes at halftime, different groups get recognized, different games belong to different groups. And everyone's kind of in a holding pattern right now. So, I think that, we'll wait to see. I mean, Franklin said that, he doesn't know for sure yet. And he wasn't going to tell us in case he was wrong and, or to, make someone mad who might try to change things on him. But, I'd like to know soon for planning purposes. And, I think a lot of other people would like to know soon too.
Yeah, especially those who may be renting out Airbnbs around the area. No, I think generally this is a remarkable part about college football where we can spend 5 minutes on the podcast and people can spend a lot of their energy focused on, well, what game are we supposed to wear white shirts to watch football? And it's a big deal and everyone wants to know, and you're going to get headlines out of it. And still we'll stay tuned on that one. Something else that James Franklin did mention about the ongoing Beaver Stadium renovations, which are massive, obviously very expensive. He talked about the ability to allow football to support other entities and increase revenue for other opportunities like concerts, events. We've already seen things taking place in Beaver Stadium, a large concert not too long ago. James Franklin was there himself. He said it was his first chance to tailgate at Beaver Stadium. But he dropped a little bit of a nugget there, at least a little bit of a tease. He said, yeah, Flyers, Penguins. I think people are ears perk up thinking about the Winter Classic occurring here at Beaver Stadium. It's something he was kind of noting about that. And he also brought the college football playoff is, in terms of having a place ready in freezing temperatures potentially, or for a hockey game in freezing temperatures, you need a little bit of an overhaul. You need a little bit of an update for a lot of the situation with the pipes in Beaver Stadium. I mean, I've been up there when the press box wasn't functional, I think, because it was too cold. So we got to find out a little bit more about what is going to be possible. But I love the idea of seeing other sports potentially in Beaver Stadium. It's such a remarkable venue. And if you talk about it, no, it's not a major city, but Flyers, Penguins, I mean, that would be an extremely hot ticket. Happy Valley would be hopping for the weekend. revenue for the community would be fantastic. So there is a major trickle down, and that's been part of the case that's been made by the folks who push for this renovation is the entire Happy Valley community will benefit, and it won't necessarily be relied upon those 7 Saturdays in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the struggle with any stadium these days, especially football stadiums, especially college football stadiums, because of the way that the college football calendar is. I mean, it's 7 Saturdays a year that you've got kind of a full, going full bore. I mean, you can factor in like spring games and other things, but that's pretty much it. And so, I think that's kind of that was a big undertone. Watching that board of trustees meeting and the presentation, from Penn State about what this renovation is going to mean. And I think that on the one hand, I think that it's kind of the way that you have to sell it in terms of asking for that much money for such a big project. But at the same time, I do think that it's legitimate. I mean, talking about the support that it can do for everyone else. I mean, I think that's true, and that having a good environment there, having a place that people want to be, and you can bring recruits from other sports that you can generate that revenue that helps support everyone else. I mean, I think that's really big. What it kind of looks like, what the landscape will look like when we get to 2027, when this is supposed to be done, and you think it would be finally in the position to do a Winter Classic or something like that. We'll see what everything looks like at that point. But, I did think that was a little interesting tease by Franklin to float that out there, because I do think a Winter Classic is I feel like that's the thing I've heard the most, in the 3 years that I've lived up here. And you start talking about different things to use Beaver Stadium for, besides concerts. Winter Classic is like the most concrete thing. So we'll see how much closer we get to that concept becoming a reality.
In terms of short term, this year in Beaver Stadium, people want to see this Penn State offense put up points. Andy Kotelnicki was brought in from Kansas after being the 24/7 Sports Offensive Coordinator of the Year in 2023. And we got a little bit of a catch up with James Franklin on where things are with Andy Kotelnicki. We did hear from Kotelnicki as well. That's something that we'll circle back to next week on another episode of the podcast. But Franklin said a few things that I found interesting during that kind of some answers about Kotelnicki. He said that Kotelnicki has done a lot for the team in terms of both scheme and morale. And then he said that they're going to be difficult to defend when you're using multiple personnel groups, multiple sets, multiple tempos. One of the early words about Kotelnicki when he was surfacing on our radar as a target for Penn State was that multiplicity. We heard about it from our Kansas beat reporter when he came on the podcast. And something else that I just want to throw your way, Daniel, and this, I have a hard time not thinking of Nick Singleton, Katron Allen in some circumstances last year. Franklin says there's an added emphasis on getting the ball into the hands of Penn State's premier playmakers with consistency, kind of regardless of what circumstances are dictating. He felt that wasn't really where it needed to be in recent years. So a lot, some bullet points there, some things to maybe go through, a little gray area from what James Franklin gave us. But I think all of this points to the fact that this was not a healthy, thriving offense last season. You continue to wonder just what that looked like. But when Franklin's mentioning morale boost, and we've heard it earlier on in spring ball, that the offense was fighting more cohesively together and kind of for each other more. Now, I don't know. I mean, I can tell you Mike Yursich in media settings, we've talked about this before, about as tense typically as we've had with any Penn State coach or coordinator that I've dealt with, in 8 years here. But you never know what that translates like with the team. But you do wonder right now, was it a little too tense? What did that maybe mean for Drew Aller? What did it mean for some of the other guys? And we talk about the flow of keeping playmakers involved and getting guys the hot hand. James Franklin touching on some really big topics here that he feels were missing from last year's game plan. And obviously, when you fire an offensive coordinator, you weren't thrilled with it. But this time last year, we were talking about Mike Yursich building upon such a strong 2022 season. I don't know if we'll get full clarity on what went down last year, but some of Franklin's comments and kind of the way he's contrasting them to the 2023 circumstances on offense, I found pretty fascinating today.
Yeah, we were talking about Mike Yursich building up 22 with his hand-picked quarterback, the 5-star that was his guy from the jump. I think that the scheme part, from what James Franklin said, I think that that's kind of, self-explanatory in terms of the changes. Anyone who watched Penn State last year, I think that you could tell that you needed to have some sort of overhaul. Franklin pointed to the way that they closed the year. He said the last 2 games of the season, which were the two after they fired Mike Yurcich. I don't really know how much I would hold up that Rutgers game as a proof of concept for anything, but certainly in the Michigan State game,
Yeah.
you saw these guys, get into space. You saw people, the simplification where, oh, Omari Evans can run fast. Let's get him a go ball. Things like that. You saw, kind of stripped down to basics. And it seems like that's a lesson that the offensive coaching staff is carrying forward into this year. As for the morale part, like you said, Mike Yurcich was, he could be a little prickly at times, in those media settings. And, we didn't know we didn't see him behind closed doors and everything, but, you could see, through our glimpses at practice and everything, that he was someone who was operating at like a pretty high baseline in terms of intensity, and for when he was out there. And so you can kind of see that, okay, when things, it might be, one of those things where when things aren't going well, something that when things are going good, you can deal with, might be perceived differently. So, I think that as the season went on last year and, you got to the point where, James Franklin was ready to fire his offensive coordinator during the season, I think that you can kind of understand how things behind the scenes might have needed a little bit of a morale change.
Nice tease from Franklin as well regarding the offense. He says that the running backs might be in position to, quote, reap the rewards of having a more explosive pass attack. Obviously, the explosivity of this offense was really lacking going vertical last year. And with the arm talent of Drew Aller, it was one of the more frustrating aspects of what happened on offense last year. But he seems to think that the running game can really benefit from that, which is a natural assumption. And we've been talking about the ability to unlock Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, have them kind of ride off into the sunset with this big third year. And those pieces seem to be in place in terms of utilization as well, where we might see these guys in some different spots. Franklin says Harrison Wallace, hungry after some frustrating periods of setbacks last year. Guy that they all felt within that facility was ready to take a big step in 2023. We saw it early against West Virginia, 7 catches leading the Nittany Lions. We saw it late in the Peach Bowl. I think he had 5 catches in the fourth quarter. One of them was a touchdown. And we saw it in the spring game where he was very clearly Drew Aller's favorite target. Franklin says we need him to have a big season. He called him one of the most explosive players on the roster. He's got to be. I mean, when you talk about X factors, offensively, defensively, special teams, he's up on that list for the Penn State Nittany Lions. And generally speaking, I think James Franklin working out of that conversation, you come out of that. I thought we learned some things. I thought he was pretty candid about some things, and we'll get him again down the road. But that was really, I thought, what stood out. If I missed anything, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think we hit on it. And like you said, we're really going to sift through this stuff over the next couple of days on Lions 24/7. So I'm sure something will jump out to us listening back that we didn't touch on tonight.
We'll do a little rapid fire here, go through some quick takeaways from a few different coaches on the staff here. We'll get into more on our on one of our episodes next week, and so a lot more coming your way with some of these offseason updates and player progression updates. But let's start with the youngest member of this group, and that's Deion Barnes, someone who became a full-time coach, a position for the first time ever last year. Year 2 on the job now, working with the defensive linemen, and he's got a really interesting mix there, Daniel, because they brought in a really big defensive line class from this freshman group. A bunch of them were in town in January. And meanwhile, you had a few players opt in for 6th years on campus, and you've got a bunch of 5th-year guys. So Deion Barnes has a lot to work with. And as usual, we're just curious what that rotation ends up looking like.
Yeah, it's a really interesting room. And, I asked them about that, where the dynamic of, you've got your 3 6th-year guys in the room, and then you had 5 freshmen enroll early. You've added a couple more since. What how does that work? What's that look like? And, I think that he has a lot of faith in those 6-year guys, Hakeem Beamon, Devon Elise, and Smith Vilbert, to set an example and, to be veterans and be people that all of those freshmen can look up to. I think that Deion Barnes is really excited about the group, both the defensive tackles and the edge rushers. And so, we'll see kind of, what it looks like. I asked him about a couple questions about Abdul Carter making that switch. He said that you could just tell that Carter was taking all of the coaching and took to things really well. And that you could see that he had good instincts in terms of how he was doing things and how he was taking things on. So, we'll see. I'm excited to go back through that conversation and really go through it. Deion Barnes was, I think, pretty reflective when talking about his own development as a coach and, what's different for him now as opposed to a year ago and where he's made strides. And it seems like that he really, really is focusing on trying to be, the right teacher for each of the players, in that group. And that he is attuned to how to coach guys differently and get different messages across. So, I think that, we're all excited to see what that room looks like. And, Deion Barnes is one of those people too.
It's nice when an all big defender, kind of muscles his way over to your position room during the offseason too. And we heard regarding Abdul Carter from Phil Troutwine, who gets a long look at these Penn State edge rushers on the practice field. He spent a long time, a big portion of his life trying to defend his quarterback from such edge rushers for the Florida Gators and in the NFL. He called Abdul Carter an elite pass rusher, and he was very quick to go with that terminology regarding Abdul Carter. So a lot of excitement brewing, and I think we all got a nice glimpse, especially during that blue-white game, of what that might look like come kickoff August 31st. Speaking of Phil Troutwine, got a nice rundown. Spent some time face-to-face with him in Holuba Hall on Thursday. Really a four-man conversation right now with the door open for others to join it at the offensive tackle spot, where you got to replace two stalwarts and two NFL rookies in Caden Wallace and Olu Fashanu. We talked earlier about what's brewing at left tackle, where you've got Drew Shelton returning to on-field action, going to be getting a lot of work between now and preseason camp, trying to catch up, trying to build his strength back, put on some weight. And additionally, you've got Javen Williams there. We talked about kind of reap the benefits of Shelton being sidelined and was able to build with his second spring practice session as a Nittany Lion. The other names there, Nolan Rucci, he's going to continue to cross-train, which is what he did for much of the spring ball. Focus early was at right tackle. By the end, working and dabbling in both. I think he took reps at both positions during the blue-white game. And Phil Troutwine said that Nolan Rucci's in a position where he's going to be maybe a swing guy for them. I mean, we saw Drew Shelton kind of play that role last year. He played a bunch in that role last year, but he's also been able to push for a starting job. But Anthony Donka, still the sense that I get is he's going to be hard to remove from that spot. Last time we saw Penn State's offense on the field, he was your right tackle for the second half of that Ole Miss matchup. And it was really, really something here. Phil Troutwine, when he was going through his thought process in last December, working toward the Peach Bowl, knowing that Caden Wallace was probably going to step aside after the first half of the game, he said Anthony Donka just stood out to him. Even without seeing him get a lot of run, just the length, the strength, he felt like it was there. They got a good look at him on the practice field with some reps in December, but I think he really stepped up to the plate and hit a home run in that Peach Bowl game. Really was able to exceed expectations by and large. And there's just been nothing that really makes you think that he's tripping up in that momentum process. We saw him today on the field. I think I pointed him out. I mean, he is standing out. He was standing next to Venga Ioane. And I was like, Anthony Donka looks like the bigger dude out there, which is unbelievable to say because I didn't think I would ever say anyone looked bigger than Venga Ioane on a Penn State field. But really he is brimming with a lot of potential, and everything you hear about this guy makes you wonder if he's not going to be able to be locked in as a starter for you for the next 30 games of his college career. But not discounting Nolan Rucci from that situation, and we'll see what else happens. I'll also say Nick Dawkins continues to inspire confidence that he's going to be the right guy for center. We heard from Nick Dawkins a little bit today. He's the president of the Penn State chapter for Uplifting Athletes, heavily involved in coordinating and planning the Lift for Life event today. But Nick Dawkins will be the first to tell you, and Phil Troutwine will be the second to tell you, Cooper Cousins is coming. He's coming for playing time, and someone's going to have to deal with it. It's just been Phil Trautwein was pretty much clear that this is the most impressive freshman that he has encountered as an offensive line coach. I asked if he meant period. He wanted to keep it to the offensive line conversation, but it's very clear that Cooper Cousins is going to push for a role, whether it's a center, whether it's guard, and someone's going to have to watch some football. Sal Wormley, Vega Ioane, Nick Dawkins, J.B. Nelson, who's in the mix at left guard and left tackle. You got Alex Birchmeyer, a second-year player who's trying to make inroads at the guard position. But it just seems like Cooper Cousins is going to find a way to get on the football field. Nick Dawkins said he's just been blown away because essentially seeing Cousins show up as an adult. He said there was no really transition required. And we've discussed seeing him on the camp setting time and time again with Phil Trautwein, like his right-hand man. And, this guy could be coaching college football, it seems like. And you have to pinch yourself and say, hey, he just got here. He's not supposed to be like this. So a very unique situation playing out for Cooper Cousins in that room. And so that's kind of the lowdown from the offensive line situation. There's a lot more detail we'll get into over at lions247.com. But some of the bigger takeaways from Phil Trautwein in the conversation with him. And Daniel, you also heard from Ty Howell a bit, tight ends coach. A lot fewer names in that room to kind of work our way through. But, certainly not lacking for competition. When you lose an NFL tight end like Theo Johnson, everyone's looking at Tyler Warren as the main man, and there's a lot of excitement about him being an elite talent this year. Chuck Losey told us today he thinks Tyler Warren's going to go down as one of the greats at the tight end position at Penn State because of the year he's going to put up this year. But ultimately, behind him, is Andrew Rapplier going to leapfrog some of the older guys? Is Khalil Dinkins going to stiff arm him and be that number 2 player? You heard something about Jerry Cross today. It's been a while since we heard much about Jerry Cross. Joey Schlaffer, redshirt freshman, looks much more physically developed than last time we saw him based on the eyeball test today. And, oh, by the way, you can tell us, Luke Reynolds has taken very well to the strength and conditioning program, the former 5-star tight end who got to campus in January.
Yeah, definitely. Ty Howell said that Luke Reynolds got into that tight end room and looked around and saw the guys who are in there: Tyler Warren, Jerry Cross, Andrew Rapplier, Khalil Dinkins, and he's it made him really realize that he had to get bigger. And so, Howell said that Reynolds is up over 240 pounds. He got to Penn State at 214. Looking at Luke Reynolds today at Live for Life, I mean, you can see that he is built up a lot, and he's got a lot to learn. That was something else that Ty Howell said too, in terms of being a high school quarterback, playing some wide receiver at the high school level, and now making that transition to tight end. But he has the physical tools to do it, and now he's putting himself in a position where he can physically hold up. So it's going to be interesting. One thing that I talked about with Ty Howell was that for the past 3 years, the tight end depth chart has been pretty set. Where you had a couple years where you had a top 3, and then last year you had a top 2. And at this point, no disrespect to Khalil Dinkins, if you're going sequentially in order of age, it's really Tyler Warren and then kind of who's next. And so, Ty Howell said that he expects to have a really healthy competition, and, different guys can be used in different ways, and that could be their avenue to playing time in certain situations. So I'm really curious to see how that shakes out. I mean, there is excitement for Andrew Rapplier. I think physically he looks ready to go. Hal said that, in terms of Jerry Cross, like he teased, Hal said that he feels things have clicked for him this year. I talked with him kind of about how there's been injuries, and then just overall, I mean, progression isn't always linear for these guys when they get to campus. Some guys it's ready to go year 1, other guys it's year 3 or 4. So that'll be something to monitor, kind of see how that is shaking out there. But I think that's going to be a fun group, and Tyler Warren is kind of the unquestioned leader and really the headliner of that group. And I think that leadership and status kind of expands beyond just the tight end room and to the team as a whole, in terms of, where he is as an example, as a leader.
You dropped some nuggets on weight gains. I should go back and do the same about a couple freshman offensive linemen, because these are big numbers. Phil Trautwein told me that Garrett Sexton, an offensive tackle who made the move to campus in January, is up to 300 pounds. That's not surprising because we got eyes on him on Sunday. he was at Penn State's prospect camp. I saw him standing next to Cooper Cousins and Drew Shelton, and he looked far different than the guy who was camping here last year at 260 pounds, 255 pounds, whatever he was. He was announced at 260 pounds in December on signing day. Remember, if you forget the backstory with Garrett Sexton, who ended up being a top 24/7 offensive tackle recruit out of Wisconsin, as a sophomore in high school, he weighed 190 pounds and he played quarterback. He's now a 300-pound freshman offensive tackle at Penn State University. And Phil Trautwein says, now that he's going to get a chance to get involved in preseason camp, get some practices under his belt, he's somebody who was working his way off of an injury during spring ball, so we didn't get to see much of him in action. Phil Trautwein says the goal for him is to get him on that travel squad, get him to a situation where he's joining the team for those road trips, not staying home. So we'll see if he can get there. But one of the most intriguing, if not the most intriguing players in this entire recruiting class to me is Garrett Sexton, and early returns are pretty interesting in terms of his physical growth. And then the other is Egan Boyer. I mean, they listed him at 250, Daniel, on signing day, and we were all kind of like, wow, that is light for a 6'8" offensive tackle prospect coming to Penn State. And then Phil Trautwein goes in and tells me, well, he showed up to campus in January at 238 pounds at 6'8". Naturally, I'm like, have you ever encountered a freshman offensive lineman that light? And he says, oh, well, yeah, some guy named Chris Lindstrom was about 233 up at Boston College. And if you don't know who Chris Lindstrom is, he's just the highest paid guard ever in the NFL. He's a multi-time all-pro player for the Atlanta Falcons, who once was under the tutelage of Phil Trautwein, became a first-round pick. So a nice little throwback there in terms of the weight. But so 238 when he gets to campus in January, now 272 pounds. So between some of these guys, you talked about Luke Reynolds. I mean, we're talking 30 pounds, more than 30 pounds since January. This is like Tony Rojas last year, but for a few guys scattered in this recruiting class. So, just this is what Penn State does, and this is kind of why you buy into a strength and conditioning program and let them do what they do to build you up. And it's going to be fun to see what these guys can do come August against some of these older players. You remember, we're talking about 18-year-old players fresh out of high school going up against 22, 23. There's some 24-year-olds out there roaming on the practice field. So it's a big step up, but exciting to hear about some of those gains that have already been made. We did hear from Chuck Losey talking about gains, and I'll give this to you, Daniel, on Nick Singleton, because you spent some time over there with him. Chuck Losey, though, was raving. He basically said that Nick Singleton has set a standard for everyone within that program right now, people coming in the future, in terms of how you handle your business and how you stay accountable and how you just keep moving forward and don't settle. And we've seen it firsthand. We watched him bang out a bunch of squats on Max Day in February, and he's the closest thing that we've seen in that kind of weightlifting setting to Saquon Barkley that I can really recall. And we heard a lot of similar things about Barkley back in his time here, about setting the standard, a guy that was going to resonate within the weight room and the locker room for years to come. And Singleton isn't someone who's going to toot his own horn. But Losey said he's gone and packed on about 20 pounds since he got to campus while getting faster. And you got some of those particulars from Singleton.
Yeah, our Mark Brennan was over there and got the raw details from Nick Singleton. He said he ran the 40 this year at 4.33. He did not run it last year, but 2 years ago as a freshman, he was at 4.39. Mark followed up and asked, about the weight, and Singleton said he's around 225 when running that 4.33. And you think about it last year, on that chart that Daquan Hardy posted to Instagram, Hardy was at the top and he was at 4.32 and he weighed, 180 pounds soaking wet. And so just the quality of athlete that Nick Singleton is just, you really marvel at it a little bit. And it's been talked about since he got on campus, where he really did have that thorough, strength training background. And I think that there's something where, when you have that sort of background, that creates that sort of mindset. And Nick Singleton has really been able to apply that. And, we're seeing the results.
Tony Rojas, heat check. Yes, he's still a hot name in team facilities. Chuck Losey saying that not only has he become one of the leading voices here ahead of his sophomore season among the linebackers, but he says he is one of those guys within this entire defensive structure. A lot of potential in place here for between Tom Allen in this system with Tony Rojas. We expect him to be the main man next to Kobe King. Going to see a lot of these 3 safety sets with Zakee Wheatley involved, but those are the 2 linebackers we expect to see the most of. And Tony Rojas is someone who continues to just work his way up the ladder as being one of the leaders of this defensive unit, and it's pretty incredible. It's pretty impressive considering last year he got some spots to get time, but we didn't really get a lot of extended play. A lot says a lot about how he carries himself and the work he has put in, and obviously what he has proven on the practice field. I think everyone understands, though it hasn't happened in game action a ton yet, it's going to happen in game action for Tony Rojas. And a few young guys that we got the spotlight on from Chuck Losey, which is always helpful. Chuck is going to have his eyes on people's development as well as anybody within this facility. He talked about Pittsburgh Central Catholic freshman prospects coming in, Anthony Specca and Peter Gonzalez. They were May enrollees. Said he was very, very encouraged by the foundation that they brought, far ahead of a lot of high school peers making that jump, especially important when we're talking about guys who aren't going to have that winter conditioning program, spring practices ahead of them. And Peter Gonzalez is a player that we talked about maybe factoring in, bigger body, contested catch kind of player on the perimeter at receiver. Specca, a box linebacker, and we've gotten some looks at him. Definitely looks like he's Big Ten ready, which I didn't know if he would be there just on the eyeball test, but he looks like he's there already ahead of his freshman year. And then pointing to Cooper Cousins, no surprise there, Luke Reynolds and Xavier Gilliam, a defensive lineman as freshmen who have been especially strong performers in year 1 here with Penn State. We'll have a lot more from Chuck Losey, the coordinators, the assistant coaches, even James Franklin over at Lions247.com. But we wanted to give you a bunch out of our notebook here coming from team facilities. And another thing that stood out to us was Tyseer Denmark out and about with his new teammates. The Penn State freshman receiver now has made the move to campus. He has joined Josiah Brown and Peter Gonzalez as the trio of freshman receivers in this group. And he's somebody that we talked about a bunch here, Daniel, being a really impressive player on the 7-on-7 circuit. He lit it up with Roman Catholic. He didn't have the production necessarily with Imhotep as a senior here in Philadelphia, but I think there is a lot of stuff bubbling underneath the surface here with Tyseer Denmark. Cautious optimism, maybe we could call it, within program facilities, with the people who are close to Denmark, back from Philadelphia, that he really can, despite getting here in the summer, surge and make a push to be a playmaker for Penn State in 2024.
Yeah, we saw Tyseer Denmark spending some time with Abdul Carter on the field during Live for Life today. Two Philly guys who picked Penn State, hanging out and catching up. But I think that you look at this wide receiver group, and we've said it so much, is that the opportunity is there. And you mentioned it a little bit with Peter Gonzalez having that little bit of a different body type, that maybe that could be an avenue for him, and then Tyseer Denmark, we've heard so much about that quickness, that short area speed and what that could possibly mean, how that could fit into an offense like Andy Kotelnicki's, where it's predicated on, letting guys do what they do best and getting them the ball in positions to succeed. So I'm excited to see what it looks like, when we finally see Denmark out there.
Now, we'll finish off with Spotlight on Live for Life. You wrote a story before we hopped on to record about the significance of this event. And it's one of those, we cover a few of these where Penn State's not about football. And we're guilty of it as Penn State football beat reporters. I know the players and coaches are guilty of it, of getting consumed at times by those 12 games coming up on the schedule in the fall and all the preparation that goes into it and the dynamics in play. An event like this, you can kind of come up for air, look around, and gain a little bit of perspective. What did you pick up today from the conversations you had, and tell us a little bit about the story you put together?
I did just check briefly, and Tyseer Denmark is on the roster.
Hello.
Officially now, 5'10", 180. No number yet, so we'll wait and see on that. But going back to Live for Life, I mean, I think it's cool that Penn State does a nice job of promoting things like Live for Life and the Thon Explorers program, to have us come in and get to see these players in a little bit of a different setting. And I also think that that's carried over a little bit into how some of these players handle NIL and their opportunities in terms of the different foundations and different charity work that they have, because we've seen guys be really open about what they're doing, and wanting people in the public to be a part of it. But Live for Life, it's another opportunity to see. You've got players, working the kids clinic, holding. There's a bunch of offensive linemen and defensive tackles holding up tackling dummies for small children to run by and hit and land on the pads. And you're seeing some, and it's mostly like the young guys, seeing the freshmen and the sophomores, first and second year players, really interacting with the public for the first time as Penn State football players. I think that's something that's really unique and interesting to see. And I think Live for Life, it's something that has Penn State roots. Scott Shirley got it started in the early 2000s. Brett Brackett, who's the Uplifting Athletes general manager, he's a Penn State letterman, who gets to come back. And he said that the Penn State chapter is probably the best one that he's ever around, even though he admitted that he's biased. But yeah, I just think it's a good way to connect, good way to raise money for rare disease research and awareness and things like that. And it's kind of a cool thing to have on the calendar every summer.
It is, and we're happy to cover it. There's video, there's photo gallery, we have Daniel's story, and then there's just going to be a ton coming out of this. And we're going to mix in this huge 7-on-7 tournament and big man challenge on Friday. And oh, by the way, as we'll get to in just a moment, a bunch of official visitors in town. So June is hopping. We're only about halfway through, not even to the halfway mark yet. And as you see, plenty to keep your eye on. Daniel, appreciate the perspective. Good to be back on the Penn State practice field with you. We'll do it again Friday, this time following on high school prospects.
Thanks for having me, Tyler.
This episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast continues with focus on the upcoming weekend, another key one for Penn State recruiting efforts. We'll be back on Penn State practice fields and really all across campus for a huge 7-on-7 tournament taking place starting Friday morning, deep into Friday afternoon, early evening perhaps. Check out our coverage at lions247.com. We'll be doing live updates throughout. Like last Friday, along with the 7-on-7 tournament, there'll be a big man challenge happening, which will feature a bunch of linemen on both sides of the ball, working with Deion Barnes, Phil Troutwine, and Penn State coaches. We're going to break down this weekend from that perspective in a bit with Tyler Calvaruso, but we begin with focus on the third consecutive official visit weekend. And this time it has a very familiar feel. A lot of commits are going to be on campus, but there are a few who have not yet made their announcement for college picks. We're going to get into those targets. We'll talk about the ramifications of these commits getting together here in Happy Valley right now with Tyler Calvaruso. Welcome back, my friend.
Thanks for having me, man. It's definitely a different kind of weekend, but it still carries plenty of intrigue. So
we'll get into some of those names of guys who are not yet determined in their college decision. Let's begin, though, with the large kind of storyline here for Penn State. It's a bit of a reunion of sorts, and in some cases, guys are getting together for the first time within this 2025 class. Of course, it's growing. We saw a top 100 prospect, and Dixon joined the group on Monday out of California. So some of these guys are still learning about each other. They're certainly learning about campus, learning about the coaching staff. What do you think this opportunity presented to Penn State means? Because we've been focused on, a dozen uncommitted prospects the last couple of weekends. And now it's more of getting the family together to share some meals, break bread, and then head home feeling good about their decisions.
That's essentially what it is. I mean, the entirety of the class, sans Dixon, is going to be on campus. And obviously the only reason Dixon's not going to be around is because he's coming off his official that led to the commitment in the first place. So this group, it aligns with what happens behind the scenes every recruiting cycle. These guys, they get to know each other through unofficial visits during the spring. Now, it goes without saying, during the spring, not everyone is in the same place at the same time. These guys, they get familiar with each other in the group chats. They get familiar with each other, if they get the opportunity to work on the camp circuit, like Beckham Kritza and Brady O'Hara being in town at the same time earlier this month. But this is a different kind of opportunity for this group to bond. And, just really reflecting on the past couple of cycles and these big commit visit weekends, it always feels like the group comes together really nicely. They get a good bond on, and they get very comfortable being around each other. And you always have a lot of conversations about what the future in State College might look like when those guys are in town. So it's definitely an opportunity for the staff to get closer as a whole. Any guys who may not know each other as well, make up some lost time in that regard, get more comfortable. But it's gonna be a fun weekend. in that regard. And, you've got some storylines among the commits as well, too. It's not just your cut and dry normal commit official visit weekend.
Quarterback Beckham Kritza told us he's looking forward to building on that family feel, kind of getting a strong vibe around everybody for what they're going to be able to accomplish together on campus. But he did say they'll also be pursuing some commitments. And I think before we get to those uncommitted recruits, we got to talk about the fact that the Nittany Lions are essentially attempting to lock in some of these guys. Now, some of them certainly seem locked in, like a Beckham Kritza, a Lyric Samuel, guys who have gone on the record with us recently about how they've got 2 feet firmly on the bandwagon with this 2025 Penn State recruiting class. Meanwhile, there have been some exploratory visits made by some commits, checking out other campuses. And I think in terms of looking for stabilization within this class, Tyler, we've probably got to begin with the running back group, and 13 commits on campus this weekend, 3 of them at the running back position.
Yeah, for J1 Sider this weekend, it's really about further solidifying things with the guys that he has on board. That has already happened with Keandre Barker. There's a bunch of Arkansas buzz surrounding him. He was down on Arkansas's campus for a 7-on-7 with his high school teammates, earlier in the month. And it sounded like, things were trending Arkansas's way for maybe like a 24-hour span. He was slated to get back to Arkansas for an official visit. That wound up not happening. Penn State took care of business there. So things have been smoothed over with Barker. And again, just want to hammer home to Alvin Henderson and Tyke Hayes that Penn State is the place for them to be. The relationships are already good. These guys are on board and committed for a reason. But still, Alvin Henderson popping up at Auburn during the spring, that's one we're going to be monitoring really until Henderson signs. That's just kind of really the fact of the matter in this recruitment. Then the surprising one was Tyke Hayes popping up at Stanford for a visit last week. I think that caught some people by surprise. But he has such good relationships at Penn State, namely with Terry Smith. There are ties that go beyond the football field there. So I think that one will be able to be solidified. I don't think there's an overwhelming amount of concern heading into the weekend, but J1 Sider is going to be busy. It's not just about the uncommitted guys on campus for him this weekend. It's about the guys in his room.
Yeah, and that running back room is going to be busy. They're going to be involved with hosting and trying to make these guys feel at home as well. A highly competitive group. And when you've got 3 commits on board within a cycle here, 6 months shy of signing day, you want to make sure these guys know what they're signing up for. So a good opportunity there to make sure everybody's on the same page. Is there anyone else on this commit list that you think coming back to campus, it's an important 48 hours just in terms of making sure the Penn State commitment is not in question and that moving forward, this is going to be home for them?
Really, it's just DJ McClary, top 24/7 linebacker out of New Jersey, given the fact that he made it to Rutgers for an official visit during the first official visit weekend of the summer. There have been questions on our board about, new DC, McClary was a Manny Diaz guy. Is this something Penn State still wants to happen? The answer is yes. Penn State wants McClary in its 2025 recruiting class. So Tom Allen, Dan Connor, the rest of the staff, they will be working to just, again, same deal as Henderson and Hayes. State College is the place for you. They're going to make sure that he's 100% locked in moving forward because, Rutgers is an intriguing in-state option for McClary. Scarlet Knights have been recruiting well. Really, this past week, they've gone on a little bit of a heater. So I definitely think that carries a little bit of intrigue, and there's plenty of familiarity with the staff in Piscataway. But McClary's been on board with Penn State since the fall. He has remained on board. He's gotten to know Tom Allen. Those two will get the chance to take their relationship to the next level this weekend.
So, again, 13 commits going to be coming to State College. They won't be alone, though. A few uncommitted recruits to get to here, and I think we got to begin with the headliner here, the in-state standout, Andrew Olish out of Central Valley Southern Lehigh. He is somebody that we saw in the camp circuit not too long ago, back in May, during the State College Elite 11 All-22 event. He shined there. We had our national scouting analyst, Andrew Ivins, in attendance there. I know speaking with him on the sideline and afterwards about Olish's performance, it verified a lot of why he was viewed as a rising recruit. And thus, in the updated rankings from 24/7 Sports that came out a couple weeks ago, Olish all the way into the top 100 overall. He's the number 4 tight end nationally, and he's the number 2 prospect in the state of Pennsylvania. He's also the son of a former Penn State student. So, look, there seems to be a lot of things working in Penn State's favor here because of the background here. The ties going back to 2023, the ties through his father with Penn State, and additionally the fact that we're talking about an in-state tight end recruit trying to get him in a position room that has produced NFL talent on a perennial basis. But working against Penn State is some of the other experiences he's had. He went down to Alabama. He went down to Florida the last couple of weekends, and he will follow this trip with a visit to Ann Arbor, Michigan, which as of now is the end of his official visit plans. Then he's going to huddle up with mom and dad, trying to come up with a decision by July. So how pivotal in the grand scheme of June is this particular visit for Penn State?
It's crucial, especially with Michigan looming. The Wolverines, they really just feel like the one to beat right now. They feel like they are Penn State's biggest competition in this recruitment. And that's not to say Alabama and Florida haven't done a good job recruiting Olish, because they have. And specifically Alabama, its tradition and pedigree of winning, even with the new staff in Tuscaloosa, has appealed to Olish. So those two SEC programs have definitely given Olish something to think about in his decision when that time comes. But you just continue to get the sense in asking around that's going to come down to Penn State and Michigan. And that's what makes this weekend so important. You mentioned his Penn State background and the family lineage with Olish, having a father who graduated from Penn State. That's part of the reason why this visit was scheduled for this weekend. Get him around the commits, pick up on that family feeling, and, really feel at home among a group of guys who could potentially be your teammates at the next level. The feeling that could potentially be a big selling point in Penn State's favor this weekend. And then you just look at the grand scheme of Penn State's involvement with Olish. The relationship with tight ends coach Ty Howell is top-notch. It's arguably the best of any assistant in Olish's recruitment. It's not really just, that Howell's done a nice job pitching him on development, or how he can get him to the next level, or how he can make him feel at home at Penn State. He's kind of, guided him throughout his recruitment process in a sense, because he was involved with Olish when he was an underclassman and he had yet to break through with a power conference offer. He was still very involved, keeping an eye on him, keeping tabs on him, helping him through his process. And when Olish got to camp at Penn State last summer, those two met for the first time in person, and relationship has really taken off from that point on. So I think that's something that Penn State really has working in its favor. And I did mention development because that's a big aspect of what Olish is looking for, and he's well aware of the pedigree at tight end in terms of getting guys to the next level. The number of tight ends Penn State has sent to the NFL, and even the recent recruiting success the Nittany Lions have had at the position, going out and getting high-level guys like Andrew Rappelier and Luke Reynolds. All of that appeals to Olish, but Michigan, again, has done a very good job with him. Nice blend of academics and athletics that appeals to Olish's mother. She's gone on record talking about how highly she thinks of Michigan. So it's a real battle here for Penn State. And as much as Penn State loves its tight end commit in Matt Henderson, it would love to get Olish on board in this class. Not only would you be going out and getting the top 100 talent, the number 4 tight end in the nation, and a guy who can be a potentially blue chip player for you at the next level, you get the opportunity to keep him one for a Big Ten rival, and potentially even the SEC as well. So that'd be a big win for Penn State on 2 fronts.
I spoke with a few Nittany Lions commits about Olish and his official visit upcoming, and his importance potentially to this recruiting class. And Beckham Kritza basically said he's a beast, and this would be a really, really big win for them. We heard from Matt Henderson, as you mentioned, the tight end commit in this class. He feels like it'll be very strong complementary pieces. Those two worked alongside each other at a state college camp last month. And then Brady O'Hara, who's transitioning at the college level, at least, over to the offensive line. From everything that we gather, he'll be playing tight end for his high school squad as a senior. He talked about really identifying him as a strong target for this class overall. So good to hear from, like, the tight ends want him, the quarterback wants him, we know the staff wants him, and I don't think there's going to be any lack of priority feel for Olish making this visit. So when it's all said and done, do you think that Penn State, I guess before we even get into the official visit, do you think Penn State is playing shoulder to shoulder here right now in the recruitment? Are they perhaps slightly ahead entering this official visit, or do they maybe suddenly have a little bit of ground to make up? What's kind of your read on how things are pre-visit?
I lean shoulder to shoulder. I think maybe, if anything, they're a notch below Michigan, but it'd be a very, very small notch. I think this is a really tight race right now. It's one that's probably too close to call until Olish sits down with his family, recaps what they experienced on the official visit front, and then goes forward with a decision. So that kind of opens the door for Penn State to really kind of knock this one out of the park and assert itself as the top school in Olish's recruitment. But again, with that visit to Ann Arbor looming beyond his trip to State College, that's something you got to keep a really, really close eye on. Just given the feedback that we've picked up on with Olish and how highly he thinks of Michigan.
Yeah, Olish last season, 53 catches, 972 yards, 10 touchdowns, 6'5", 215-pound range right now. I think he's about 15 pounds heavier than what he was going into his junior season, and he's running in the 4.6 range in the 40-yard dash. So a lot to like about his prospect profile. Looking at Penn State's point of view here, you've got Tyler Warren, fifth-year senior, expected to be one of the premier tight ends in the country this year, then move on to the NFL. And beyond him, you've got 5 relatively unproven competitors in that room, and 4 of them were 4- or 5-star additions since 2021. That includes Luke Reynolds, who was the #1 overall tight end recruit in the 2024 recruiting cycle and is getting to work now toward his freshman year. So Olish is going to command interest from our readers, from our listeners. We will pick this back up early next week and kind of fill in the blanks on where the feedback is coming out of Penn State and before the Michigan official visit. Another past target to know making the trip to campus this weekend. And we've seen Penn State host a bunch of different receivers from within the region, from beyond the region this month. Taz Williams making the trip up from Red Oak, Texas. He's the number 50 wide receiver in 24/7 Sports rankings, and he's also got a commitment scheduled for mid-July, so the clock is ticking for Taz Williams.
Now, one thing that I've been really kind of leaning heavily on when discussing Williams is, because I think it's a big part of why Penn State is still involved and high on his list, is he's not your typical guy from Texas who's an out-of-region target giving the Nittany Lions a look. He's from Pennsylvania. He still has family in the Pittsburgh area. He still trains in the area during the offseason on occasion. He's familiar with some of the top players in the WPIAL. You know, he's familiar with the football landscape in Pennsylvania. And even though he didn't visit Penn State for the first time until January, that overall familiarity with the landscape of PA and just the way things are in the area, that's a big reason why Penn State has been able to hang around in this race, despite the likes of SMU, Texas A&M being pretty heavily involved. Michigan is heavily involved here as well. And, you know, for a long time, it's kind of felt like the Wolverines would be the one to beat and get this one done. But Penn State is going to get its chance with Williams this weekend. Very interested to see how this one plays out, given he wasn't around during the spring. So they'll be jumping from, you know, January in the winter to summer in State College. He's going to have some catching up to do with the staff. He's definitely going to get a different kind of look at the campus, given the weather conditions. And I think that from a skill set perspective, Williams, he kind of intrigues me in the sense that he does a lot of things really, really well. I'm not sure he quite has that, you know, standout trait or two that you see out of some of the other names on Penn State's wide receiver board, but he's a really, really solid prospect. And even though he might not necessarily have that standout trait right now, from a developmental standpoint, if you add a guy who is already very good at a bunch of different things at the high school level, you can work to take 1, 2, maybe even 3 of those traits to the next level, into that top tier or maybe even elite status, depending on how his development plays out. I think all of that makes Taz Williams one of the more intriguing visitors of the weekend. You know, there are some high-level guys definitely beyond the commits, and Williams is one of them.
Williams down to Texas A&M, where he was last weekend for an official visit. SMU down in Dallas is in the mix here. And then Michigan, like Olish, is next up on the official visit itinerary after he wraps up things with Penn State this weekend. He'll head to Ann Arbor next weekend. And again, a July commitment anticipated from Williams, who last year as a junior, 80 receptions, more than 1,200 yards, and a guy who's really established himself on the track and field circuit as well as a sprinter. So moving on from him and staying far beyond the region, we'll go down to Florida, look at a defensive lineman, Randy Edrica. I believe he's been to campus before this spring, correct, Tyler?
Yes, he was at the Blue-White game.
Yeah, and then this is somebody considered a top 50 defensive lineman in the composite rankings. He's a 3-star prospect, and he is out of that Miami Central program that we're going to be referencing throughout the year because quarterback commit Beckham Kritza is down there.
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of those situations where you get a guy on campus in Edrica, and you're going to be feeling him out throughout the weekend. You know, he was pretty productive as a junior at Miami Central. When you're going up against some of the top competition in Florida and you're posting the numbers he was posting, I believe off the top of my head it was 26 tackles, 16 stops for a loss, and 11 sacks. I'd say it's a damn good junior season, and I think that has definitely drawn the interest of some Power 4 programs, Penn State being among them. He was at USC this past weekend for an official visit. It seemed like things went well with the Trojans, and Miami's on the docket for Ederica next weekend, and the Canes have been the 24/7 Sports crystal ball favorite to land him for a while now. But I want to see where things go with him coming out of the weekend. How do things check out on the size front? I think that's a question that still needs to be answered to some degree. And you got to remember, if you're a Penn State fan, it's a different kind of cycle for the Nittany Lions on the interior after taking a bigger group last cycle. Deion Barnes has a bunch of guys who are still at the top of his board available for the taking. Jarquez Carter was on campus last weekend. Yvonne Kamaju from Maryland was on campus during the first weekend of June. So there's still some moving parts here for Penn State with the interior of its defensive line board. Ederica is going to be the latest name making it to campus, and we'll see where the chips fall after the weekend. But remember, it's going to be a smaller group on the interior.
One more name to get to, and we'll stay on the defensive side of the ball. Penn State added a premier cornerback earlier this week with Darius Dixon out of Mater Dei High School in Southern California. We look toward the Garden State now, St. Joe's Regional in Montvale, New Jersey. Top 24/7 cornerback Jameer Joseph. And when we've been bringing up the cornerback class conversation, far before Darius Dixon jumping on board, you have been pretty adamant about keeping Jameer Joseph as part of that dialogue. Where is his recruitment going into this weekend?
Yeah, really going into official visit season, we looked at Joseph and Brandy Finney as Terry Smith's top cornerback targets. Then Dixon kind of bursted onto the scene more and worked his way into that conversation. But Finney and Joseph remain high in that pecking order for Penn State. He just carries so much athletic upside. I mean, his athletic profile and his high school production, it's really, really impressive. Playing in North Jersey, he's accomplished a lot in his career, both on the gridiron and on the hardwood as a basketball player. So multi-sport athlete that always appeals to coaches at the next level. Penn State has really, really hung around in this recruitment as a top option for Joseph. He hasn't been on campus since the opener against West Virginia in September. It's been a long time since he's been around in that sense, but his basketball schedule was really busy in the winter. That made him difficult to get out and take visits during the winter and the spring. So he's kind of playing catch-up, checking back in with some of his top options. He was at Stanford. He was at Notre Dame. The Notre Dame visit went really well. I would say the Fighting Irish are Penn State's top competition here. Then he's going to be at South Carolina next weekend. But get the sense this one's going to come down to Penn State and Notre Dame. When it's all said and done, Penn State has been high on Joseph's lips from the start. I anticipate that will continue. I think this has the potential to be another big-time recruiting win for Terry Smith at some point. I'm not sure if that happens coming out of the weekend necessarily, but I think that Penn State has the power to get this one done in the end. And look, Smith has been rolling on the trail in recent cycles. You see it with Dixon coming on board. I think Joseph and Finney, Penn State's sitting pretty nicely for both of those guys, and they're going to get their crack with Joseph this weekend.
As usual, Tyler Calvaruso does a great job setting the stage for another official visit weekend here in State College. It'll be the third consecutive large official visit weekend. There's one more to come next weekend, and then I think some of these coaches might get a little time to spend with their family before July. But when we look at this weekend, as usual in June, there's more than just an official visit weekend. There is an event on Friday. We're hearing perhaps up to 50 teams involved for this 7-on-7 tournament, which is about 30 more teams than we were following around the field last Friday. Meanwhile, you've got the Big Man Challenge occurring. Phil Troutwine, Deion Barnes, Penn State staff trying to get eyeballs on top rising linemen defensively, offensively. And so there's going to be a lot to glean from this. We'll have notebooks, we'll have photos. All of us, our full-time staff, will be out on the field throughout Friday. But Tyler, before we go out and do all that, what are you most intrigued by as you kind of prepare for our coverage?
You've got some of the top programs in Pennsylvania that are going to be there. Imhotep is planning on participating. That gives you the chance to see, some really talented prospects out of the Philly area. Multiple guys who are on Penn State's radar. You got Harrisburg High expected in town. That gives you a look at running back commit Messiah Mickens, top 2026 target on the O-line, Kevin Brown. So there's a lot there. And, there are some programs from Maryland who are top-tier programs in that state. They're going to be in attendance. It's looking like a really strong 7-on-7 tournament here coming up on Friday. And, we're going to have coverage of it throughout the day. It's going to be another fun one. I've got a good feeling about that. We saw a pretty dominant quarterback performance from Samaj Beals last weekend. I've got a feeling it might not be at quarterback, but I got a feeling we're going to see a guy or two really stand out and shine throughout the afternoon.
Again, we'll have live updates at lions247.com throughout. We'll be posting video, notes, analysis, and there's always all kind of different observations and interactions that we get to be privy to by just being on the field, being in the thick of the action. And you never really quite know what's going to be on your agenda going onto the field on these Fridays. But by the end of it, we always have a ton of content to share with you at lions247.com. 30% off VIP access right now. So you'll get in the door, be able to see everything that we're reporting on from Penn State facilities. A few more notes on the Penn State recruiting trail as we wrap up this segment of the Lions 24/7 podcast. Tyler, a couple of visitors made their way up from Florida, and these weren't weekend visitors. It was in the middle of the week. Tell us what we need to know.
Yeah, it might be official visit season, but that never stops the staff from keeping its eye on the future. It's a couple of really talented guys from the Sunshine State in the secondary making it to campus. Xavier Larice from UGally, I believe I'm saying that correctly. I have no idea how you pronounce that program's name. So if there's anyone from that program listening and I just completely butchered it, I sincerely apologize. But he's a top 24/7 safety. He's got an offer from Penn State, really talented, hard-hitting safety. Staff likes him early on. And then you've got Tamaj Mitchell from Mandarin High in Jacksonville. And no, he is not related to John Mitchell. There's no relation there. Those two are their own different families. They come from different backgrounds, but same high school now after Mitchell transferred from Bartram Trail to Mandarin for his junior year. Really productive as a sophomore at Bartram Trail. If you look at some of the numbers, I should also mention Larice just real quick, looking back through some of these numbers, 68 tackles as a sophomore, kind of really burst onto the scene after only registering 10 as a freshman. And the big thing with Larice is he's a three-sport athlete. He plays football, he plays basketball, he plays baseball. We mentioned the athletic profile with Joseph. Larice definitely has that in his own regard. But just back to Mitchell, who also has offers from Duke and FAU, his sophomore year, and he's kind of undersized and still growing physically. He's only checking in at around 5'9", 150, but he had 47 tackles. And what really stood out to me when diving into his game, he had 25 pass breakups as a sophomore. And that's really impressive, especially for a guy his size, really just still coming along in his development physically and as a corner. I think that speaks volumes about his upside. He also picked off 3 passes. So 2 productive DBs from Florida. They're going to be guys we discussed in that 2026 class, and we've seen it kind of cycle in and cycle out at this point. You really can't count Penn State out when it comes to a Florida DB, not with Smith on the trail.
Well, I'd imagine with all those pass breakups that Tamaj Mitchell was seeing all the passes that weren't going in the direction of John Mitchell and Antoine Belgrave-Shorter last season, the 2 current Penn State freshmen in the cornerback room from that Mandarin program. And now they have eyes on another in Tamaj Mitchell, who got up to campus here. And then just going back to Larice real quick, out of the Orlando area, he is a top 24/7 prospect as of now. Mitchell still awaiting his initial ranking and rating from 24/7 Sports. So Penn State not waiting just for the weekends to get guys on campus and try to showcase the program. It's happening throughout June at different times. Tyler's all over it. Let's finish with a little bit of a peek. We don't want to give the whole thing away because I thought it was a fantastic piece you wrote up on Wednesday regarding the top camp performers that we have covered here the last couple of weeks. It's kind of the first half of June, I guess you could say. We're going to have another half of June to dissect guys, and I think coming out of June, we'll have a really comprehensive list of the campers who impressed and where they stand with Penn State and how old they are and all that different stuff. But you documented, I think, 10-plus guys, a dozen-plus guys on Wednesday that really shined to us. Let's talk about 2 or 3 of them here. Who are some of the real, genuine standouts thus far that we've seen on the practice fields of Penn State?
Zion Ely is one of the top edge rushers in the 2026 class, and I think he kind of showed everyone why with his camp performance at Penn State. He was really just dominant throughout that first elite showcase camp, just giving the offensive lineman a ton of issues. So he was the one who really stood out to me, among a pretty impressive group. Jacob Weatherspoon, the 4-star corner from Ohio. I mean, he went through testing and was running some really impressive 40s, and he didn't look tired at all. And as camp goes on, you start to see some guys wear down a little bit. He wasn't one of them. He was still making some really strong plays in coverage throughout the second camp. And he was just, I really, really like his upside. And I think Penn State's a big fan of his upside as well. Ohio State just jumped in with an offer, and he's going to be a high-level prospect out of Ohio. And a couple other guys who really stood out, Damari Simeon, the defensive lineman from South Jersey. He was very, very good during that second elite showcase camp. Miles McAfee, 27, wide receiver from Archbishop Spalding. He's going to be one of the big-time receivers in the region as an upperclassman. And then Caden Gebhardt, top 24/7 prospect from Ethan Grunkemeier's alma mater, Olentangy in Ohio. You know, the two were teammates, and now they're going to have the opportunity to team up at the next level with an offer going out to get part. And I got to close on Braswell Thomas, just given what he accomplished during the first Elite Showcase camp. Testing was really, really impressive. And, you know, Penn State had been keeping its eye on Thomas. You know, they've had its eye on him since he was an underclassman. And really, you know, when you have a guy like Thomas who's kind of bordering on, you know, that bubble in terms of you want to pick things up or you're going to go in a different direction, him camping at Penn State and turning in the performance that he turned in, he's very much on that radar for the staff now. He did himself a hell of a job. He's going to be on campus for an official visit next weekend, and that's going to be a pretty pivotal visit for him.
We will keep tabs on all the camp coverage. We'll get you some new names. There's been the 7-on-7 tournament. We'll have more of those as well. Comprehensive coverage over at lions247.com. A lot more names on that list. I'd suggest if you are following our VIP coverage, check out what Tyler put up on Wednesday regarding the prospects who have impressed on the camp circuit. A nice summary of those that we've seen. Appreciate the perspective as always. I'll let you get back to work. I will see you on the field Friday. We'll be following a bunch of 7-on-7 squads and linemen around for several hours. It's always a good time with you out there. In the meantime, safe travels and catch up with you real soon.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Great stuff as always from Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting insider at lions247.com. Before him, you heard from Daniel Gallen breaking down what we heard today from Penn State coaches over at team facilities. A ton happening right now here in Happy Valley and over at lions247.com. Follow our coverage throughout a very busy weekend. We will come back to you with a couple more episodes next week, more official visitors to look forward to, and perhaps some commitment plans also coming together as Penn State tries to build its 2025 class out. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. Thanks, as always, for tuning in to the Lions 24/7 podcast.